Hello, welcome back. So today in this video, let us understand web activity in Azure Data Factory in detail. As you are already might be aware that as part of the data channel, we are bringing up the series of Azure Data Factory videos where we'll be explaining the different activities in the Azure Data Factory in detail. So we would recommend you to go to the playlist and follow all the videos to learn all these Azure Data Factory activities in detail. So before proceeding, if you are new to this channel and haven't yet subscribed for this channel, we would recommend you to please subscribe for the channel and also press bell button for instant notifications. Let's get started. So as we can see, Azure Web Activity, Azure Data Factory Web Activity is used to call a custom REST API endpoint from an Azure Data Factory or Synapse pipeline. So basically, there will be existing REST API endpoint. So that REST API endpoint can be called, right, using this web activity. And basically, when we are calling it, right, we can use get method or post method. If you are not aware of the REST API, so we would recommend you to please go and check what exactly the REST API HTTP service looks like. And you'll be able to understand what are the different methods. Basically, there's a get method, post method, and different kinds of method that you can see in the web activity, right? So basically, you can utilize any methods, and you can also post the method, post a payload. Basically, we call a payload as the data that we are getting or posting, right? That we call it as a payload. So that payload can be get, or that payload can be posted also. And the important thing is, you can see you can pass the data set and link service to be consumed, right? So you can either you can even pass the data via the link service. Suppose you have a database table, so that database table data you want to push to this web API service, you can pretty much do that using this data set. And also, if you want to push the link service details to the REST API endpoint, you can pretty much do that. We will see that in the demo. And coming to the examples, what you can do with the web activity REST API, right? As I was telling, a payload is a data that you want to send, and you can get the payload from a REST API endpoint, or also you can post the payload from a REST API endpoint. So when you are posting it, when you're using a post method, that means you want to push something to the REST API endpoint. Basically, add or update the current records or the current data which is existing in the REST API endpoint system. And also, you can trigger the logic app. So this is just an example that we are using. So a logic app can be triggered because logic app will expose web API, REST API basically, and that can be called, or that can be utilized using that REST API. So here we can even call this logic app using the web activity. And there is a trigger ADF pipeline. So you can even trigger the ADF pipeline, because ADF pipeline also again exposes the pipeline, or basically ADF itself in the form of REST API. That's the reason. So we can even call the ADF pipelines using the REST APIs. And also, like, if you want to pause or restart any SQL server, right? So you can pretty much do that. Suppose you are having a pipeline or you are having an ingestion, suppose say at morning 8 a.m. So before 8 a.m. you can, like 6 a.m. you can start the SQL server, so that it will be ready when you actually start pulling the data from SQL server. Right. So basically, what the example we have just taken, and what we want to summarize here is any service, right, or any application that is exposed in the form of REST API can be called. So we have given example of logic app, ADF pipeline, SQL server. You can take any applications also. Suppose you are having applications where it is accepting, right? So where you are having a mobile APIs, mobile REST APIs, so which accepts. So anything can be, any application can be hit using this get or post method, or whatever methods that you want to use, right? That it supports the maximum response payload size of 4 MB. When you hit a web URL and you get the response back in the form of payload, so that will be in the JSON format. So that limitation will be 4 MB. And web activity is supported for invoking URLs that are hosted in a private virtual network. That means if you are web activity, that means that your hosted application is in the private virtual network. So you can create a SHIR, that is a self-hosted integration runtime, and then utilize it. The integration runtime should also have a line of sight to the URL endpoint. So we can get started with a demo of the activity, web activity, and let us see what example we can see. So before going to the actual explanation, so we want to show you how exactly. Let us understand at very brief what is the web activity REST API, what exactly the REST API and how exactly it looks like, right? So as you can see, we are just taken one dummy URL, dummy REST API site where where actually it will give us a sample dummy URLs, REST API URLs. So if you just kind of go and hit this URL, you will be able to get the response back, right? So basically this example, if you see, they are trying to read all the airline detail, and you're getting that all the airline detail as a response back, as you can see, right? So you can pretty much post you can hit the post URL and basically create a airline data. You can add a airline data to the existing number of rows. So basically these are the endpoints and these are the methods basically that is being exposed, and you can utilize them to get or post whatever you want to write. And there are other methods also. If you want to like a kind of update passenger, you can use a patch kind of a method, HTTP method, right? And yeah, now let us so hope you understood how exactly this looks like, right? So this is how the REST API call will happen. Basically, you are hitting the application and you get the response in the form of a JSON format, or you post the data or post the payload to the HTTP endpoint using the JSON format as a payload. So now we are in the data factory, and as you can see, we just typed a web here, and there is a web activity in the general tab, and you can just drag that web activity here. So as you can see, the web activity, there will be general settings that you will be able to see, where you don't have much. There is no new things. So these we have already explained in the previous videos. And next, if you go to the settings, where exactly the important things will be there regarding web activity, and here this is a place where you will be giving the actual relative URL, complete URL of HTTP endpoint of a REST API service. And in the method, you will be able to see there are different methods, as we know, right? Get, post, put, delete, and patch. So these are the different supported authentication methods. And if you come to authentication, so you can authenticate the connection using any of these options. So there is a service principal, client certificate. If you click on client certificate, it will ask for you to kind of give the certificate details here. And if you're using a service principal, it will ask the service principal details. What are the client ID and secret of the Azure service principal. And if you're using none, it will be like a kind of anonymous authentication kind of thing. And if you're using basic also, it'll ask you username and password if it is a basic authentication, right? And there is option also to pass a header wherever is required when you are using these options, right? You can add any kind of headers. If you read about this, a header that are sent to request, for example, the set language, or like these are the headers, right? Like if you want to this is a content type as application JSON or whatever you want to pass, you can utilize that. So we will just delete it. And in the advanced setting, you can see, as we were telling, right, you can even host the self-hosted integration runtime if the web application that your REST API that is hosted in the private endpoint, right? And also we can see HTTP request timeout. We can give the timeout in minutes or hours, whatever the timeout you want to give there. Yeah. And disable async pattern. So you can read about this. We will not go in detail, but there is a brief description about how to when to use it. But by default, it will be disabled. And similarly, if you want to disable the certification of validation of a certification, you can click on this. And the last two options are important, right? So we were telling where you can upload the data value from the data set. Suppose if you want to send the data from the, say, like a table as a source, right? If you select the SQL Server as a table and you give the table name here, and the table data, like suppose if I want to push the employee table to the web activity REST API, then you'll be able to pass that and post it as a message to the post it as a payload to that endpoint, right? So basically the source is the table here, and you'll be passing that table value, whatever the table value you'll get as a response from this data set, that will be passed to the posted to the REST API endpoint, right? Similarly, if you are using a data set, right, so you can pretty much click on the data set and select the respective data set, the link service, and the link service connection details will be shared to the particular endpoint. So currently we will just not use these details just for demo purpose. We will just use the basic details, and if you see, we'll just get this endpoint, and we'll be able to put that detail in the URL section, and we will able to, since it is a get method, right, we'll just give the get method here, and if you can debug and see the output of this web activity, it clearly shows the entire JSON of this airline data, right, that we are looking for. Basically it is reading all the airline data, right? Similarly, if you want to post any data, right, you will be able to kind of see what is the kind of a sample request. This is a sample request it should look like, right? And if I go here and the URL is the same, and I'm just changing it to post, and once I change it to post, it will ask the body content. I'm just giving the body content here, and when we debug it, and we are able to see that there is an error. The reason is message, it says there is an airline registered under the same ID, right? So we need to kind of change the ID here. So let us give some random ID, and let us try once again to debug it. As you can see, the value of this airlines, the new ID of 1902 is being successfully added, right? And this is a response of the successful message that we are getting back. So that means the new record has been added. So similarly, as we have discussed in the slides here, we can see the different examples. We can also trigger the logic app with some payload and get the response from the logic app, and we can pretty much trigger the data factory pipelines, or start or pause any SQL Server or Synapse applications which are actually basically exposed their service as a REST API endpoint. Hope it was useful, and thanks for watching.